Hello everyone, it's Parisha from The Artistic Scroll, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to draw this magical galaxy ring in Procreate. But before we get started, here's what you'll need. Your iPad and pencil, the Procreate app, and the sketch file and color palette for the tutorial. So you can download these files for free from the Artistic Archive, which is my special vault of free resources that I've created just for you. So go ahead and download them now, and let's dive into the tutorial. So this is what the downloaded canvas will look like once you open it in Procreate. As you can see, the sketch is there. Trust me, it is there on layer 1. All you really need to do is set this galaxy ring color palette as default and then move this palette to the left. And then we're going to just go ahead and select the background color in a minute. Before that, let's just rename the layer 1 as sketch so we don't miss it in the future. And then let's just go ahead and select the background color and choose this really dark purple. It's almost a purple navy color, and you can finally see your sketch now. Yay! Alright, so now let's create a new layer and move this layer below the sketch layer. And let's reduce the opacity of the sketch layer so that we can just see our sketch. We are going to work with a rose gold kind of metal effect here for the ring. So starting off with this dark peach color and using the technical pen brush in inking, we're going to start off on our new layer just by outlining this bigger dark ring. And with the quick shape function, which means that you just simply do not lift off your pencil off the screen until you've achieved that perfect shape. Keep it there, and then that kind of makes your irregular shape into a much more structured shape. Now create the inner side of this ring the same way with the quick shape function, and you can edit and align these into place as well. If the margins aren't perfectly aligning, that's fine. I mean, the sketch is basically just like a rough idea placement. There are some areas which you won't be able to edit into place. Like here, I'm just drawing over it again. And once you're satisfied with the margins, just fill it in. Perfect. So now we're going to create a new layer under this big dark ring layer. And with this light peach color and the same technical pen brush, we're going to go ahead and outline the lighter ring. And then close your shape. I'm just erasing this little bump here. And fill it in then. And then remember, on this particular layer we've got two sides of this light ring. So create the inner light ring here as well. Edit it into place. And you can make use of all your tools here. You can use the eraser tool, you can draw over it, just so that you get a really nice clean line there. And that's it. So you've created the first big light ring. Now we're going to create a new layer and move this under the big light ring. And we're going to create this smaller light ring now, which is right at the back. Now the reason we're calling these light and dark rings is obviously because a certain area of the ring is going to be receiving more light. It's more in the light area, the rest of the parts are in the shadows. So the darker ones are in the shadows and these are more in the light, especially because it's a metal ring. They're going to be a bit more reflective towards light, definitely more polished. Not extremely, we're not totally going for a chrome effect here, but this is a nice starting point. And just like the first one, this small light ring also has an inner light ring, so draw that as well, just like I'm drawing that now. So create your outlines, edit them as needed, and then close the shape. Oh, it didn't close completely. There you go, that's fine. Now we're going to create one more layer and move this layer under the small light ring layer. This will be our dark ring layer. So choose the darker peach color, and then we're going to create this outline for the shadow side of this smaller ring. And fill it in. You can always go back to your layers and clean up the areas as needed. If there are some areas which haven't been filled completely, you can do that manually. And that's that. And again, back to the dark, smaller ring layer. Remember to complete the inner layer there as well. And fill it in. Now we're going to create the galaxy band area. So create a new layer over this darker small ring layer. And then with the purple color and the same technical pen brush, go ahead and paint the galaxy band. So we're just going to be painting this in 2 layers again. This is the top part of the galaxy band layer. And then we'll be painting the lower one in a separate layer. Complete your shape and fill it in. Okay, looks good. Now for the lower one. So create a new layer under the, let's say, what's it called? It's a bit confusing, but this smaller dark ring layer. Go ahead and create the lower galaxy band and then fill it in. Perfect, it's time for the beads now. So go right to the top and create a new layer, and then with the same purple color, create 3 circles. Well, actually we just need to create the first circle here. The other 2 will be on a different layer. So just make sure that your circle is edited into shape and fill it in. As for the other 2 beads, they're going to be behind the first big ring that we have there. So create a new layer which will be below basically the bigger light ring. So as you can see, they're behind the bigger light ring. So again, using the quick shapes, create the beads and fill them in. And that looks good. Okay, and now for our last part, we're going to be creating these crosses here, the metal crosses. So we've created a new layer on top of the small beads layer. And with the light peach color and the same technical pen brush, we're first on this layer just going to draw these the top halves of the crosses basically. The lower halves will be on a separate layer. So just draw the parts that I'm drawing right now. They are the ones that are expected to be crossing right on top, as you can see. So to make sure that I'm not exactly drawing over the circles themselves, over the beads themselves. I've just lowered the opacity of the galaxy band. You can always go back and erase any extra color off the beads, but this definitely helps. And just fill them all in. Then just slightly reduce the opacity so you can see the next thing that we're going to do. So create a new layer under this top cross layer. We're going to be drawing in the lower halves of these crosses. Yeah, I think I've overdrawn the area, so I'm just going to draw that again. There's a little part of the galaxy band that is going beyond the cross there. And just fill it in. Okay, so that's that. We're just going to increase the opacity now of the last layer. And then remember to follow these same steps for the lower, for the ones on the lower galaxy band too. So again, on the same top cross layer, we're going to draw and fill in these top crosses on the lower galaxy band as well. Just the top crosses. The ones below will be drawn on the lower layer. Okay, so that looks great. And now for the lower ones, we're going to go back to our lower crosses layer in a second. So just reducing the opacity of the top cross layer so you can see a bit better. Returning to our lower cross layer, we're drawing in the lower crosses on the lower galaxy band. I do apologize that throughout this video there's going to be lots of lower, smaller, upper and bigger variables here, quite a lot of them. So if it's a little hard to keep up, you can always just slow down the video and take a look at what step I'm doing really, or just pause it. I mean, it's a bit easier when you see exactly what I'm doing, so yeah. Okay, so we're going to increase the opacity of the galaxy band, and we're done with the color filling part. So I've turned off the sketch layer, and now we're going to go ahead and work on the galaxy band themselves. So choosing the top galaxy band, create a new clipping mask on top and change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to be working on both the galaxy bands together because they're basically the same steps. It doesn't make sense to complete one thing and then return from the beginning to the next one. So we're going to select the soft airbrush and the same purple color. Go ahead and just paint in a little bit of a gradient, a darker gradient in the middle or the center of the galaxy bands, as you can see here. So you can increase the size of your brush as needed, how much ever pressure you want to put on the screen with your soft airbrush. But we want a little bit of the lighter purple, the background purple color basically, to be slightly visible in the peripheries, as you can see here. So we're completing both the galaxy bands together, and that's looking good. Okay, so now we're going to create a new clipping mask to both the bands and change the blend mode to add. Now we're going to be duplicating this add layer twice. So in the end we get 3 add layers. Okay, so let's repeat that step for the upper galaxy band as well. Duplicate this add layer twice, so we've got 3 layers. Now selecting the lowermost, the 3rd layer basically, we'll go ahead and select the nebula brush in luminance. So we're trying to create the galaxy sort of effect. So the first color we're going to go ahead with is the sea green color, and then the brush size can be reduced to somewhere around 3%. So just very lightly paint in the nebula, very slightly. You don't have to put a lot of pressure. And then repeat that step on the lower galaxy band as well. Now we're going to be adding 3 colors, so you don't need to fill in the entire galaxy band. As you can see, I'm leaving spaces. Okay, great. Now moving on to the 2nd layer, the middle one. And with the pink color, we're going to be painting in the pink nebula. Let's return to the middle layer of the lower band as well. And there you go. Just paint in some pink. Okay. Now select the topmost layer, and then with the blue color, paint in the blue nebula. You can even reduce the brush size a little bit if you feel like it. And then returning to the lower band, topmost add layer of the lower band, paint in this blue nebula there. If you feel like some areas need some addition, then you can either try and just erase some of those areas. Well, erasing it would actually be a little bit more difficult, so I would actually suggest if you could just blur it a bit and then paint over that. It might be better in that way. Or you can simply undo your steps. Okay, so that's your nebula effect there. Next thing that we're going to be doing is adding in some stars. So create some new clipping masks. Again, change the blend mode to add. And we're creating these clipping masks to both the galaxy bands. And now we're going to select this glimmer brush. What I want you to do is to duplicate this glimmer brush and choose the top one and increase the spacing in stroke path to maximum. Once you're done with that, make sure that you've got this glimmer brush selected. And then with this blue color, with the brush size increased to about 10%, just very lightly paint in these blue stars. And then repeat that step on the lower band layer. The reason we've done this spacing technique for the brush is because this glimmer brush, which is original to Procreate, gives you clusters of stars rather than the spacing that we want. So for the next step, just increase the brush size to 15% and with the pink color draw some more stars. And then repeat that step for the top galaxy band as well. And then increase the brush size to 20%, and with the white color, we're going to draw bigger stars. So you've got 3 colors and 3 star sizes. Doesn't that look pretty? Well, the thing is with this one, you're probably going to have to try a number of times to see where exactly your stars are landing. You can even try and do this on a separate layer and edit them into place if you really want to be very particular about where you're placing in your stars. I think this looks good enough, so I'm just going to leave that there as it is. But we're done with the stars there. So that's looking very, very nice, I think. Now we want some shadows on these, on the bands themselves. So let's create a new clipping mask to both the bands and then change their blend modes to multiply. And then with the soft airbrush, in airbrushing, and with the purple color selected, you can reduce the brush size to somewhere around, I'd say, actually reduce it a little bit, around 10%. First draw these edge shadows. And then you can go ahead and reduce the size of the brush a bit further, about 7%, 7 to 8. And then we're going to draw the shadows for these crosses, depending on where our light source is coming from. Obviously, these areas are going to be having some more shadows, like the bigger bead areas have more shadows, so I've colored all of that in. Okay, now go to Gaussian Blur in Adjustments panel and then increase your blurring to about just around 3%. And that's giving it a very nice look. I like it. Okay, so return to your multiply layer on the lower band and then increase your brush size to 10% again, and first draw the edge shadow. And then, because this part of the ring would be more in the shadow area, we've covered the entire band there in shadows. And again, we're drawing shadows of these crosses on the band. And this area is going to be in the shadows as well. So we've drawn this too. Now go to Gaussian Blur again and then apply a 3% blur. I'm going to go ahead and blend some more with the soft airbrush as my smudge tool. And the size of the brush can be increased to somewhere around 27%, 25, 27, depending on how much you're comfortable with. And then just blend some of these shadows so that it looks a little bit more natural. I think that looks great. All right. Now we're just going to go ahead and group all of these layers together and rename this group as Lower Galaxy Band. And then group all the top ones together. And we're going to rename this group as Upper Galaxy Band. Perfect! It's time to work on the beads now. So we're going to work on both the beads again together. So selecting the first one, the bigger bead, create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. And repeat that step for the smaller beads layer as well. So we'll start off with the bigger bead. With the soft airbrush selected and the same purple color, you can increase the brush size a bit to around 55-56% and draw in this loose circle basically. What we're trying to do is just leave a slight sliver of the periphery there. Most of the bead will be dark. And then repeat this step for the smaller beads as well. Okay. Now we're going to repeat the step of adding in those nebula there. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and then we'll duplicate it twice to create 3 add layers. Okay, so choosing the 3rd layer of the big bead, and in luminance, select the nebula brush, and we're going to start off with the sea green color again. The brush size can be increased to somewhere around 5% for the bigger bead, or you can even reduce it. I've reduced it to around 4, but whatever works for you really. And just on one side of the bigger bead we can create the sea green one because I want to add some more colors to the rest of the bead later. But repeat this step for the smaller beads layers as well. The 3rd layer for the smaller beads. Now go to your 2nd layer and then with the pink color, paint in the pink nebula. Now go to the middle layer of your bigger bead, increase the brush size slightly, and then paint in your pink nebula more around the entire bead surface. Now go to the top layer and with the blue color, paint some more. Gives a nice foggy kind of effect as well, doesn't it? And then repeat this step again for the smaller beads. You can reduce the size of the brush to around 3%. And once you're satisfied with that, I think that looks pretty good. Now we're going to repeat the steps for the stars. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and then do the same for the bigger bead. Again, choose your altered glimmer brush in luminance and then reduce the size to 10%. And with the blue color selected, we're going to draw in, scatter in actually, your smaller stars. And then repeat that step for the smaller beads. Now choose the pink color and increase the brush size to 15% and spray in some more. And repeat that step for the bigger bead. Now increase the size again to around 20%, and with the white color we're going to add in these bigger stars. This might take a number of tries, like I have struggled here. If you're doing the same, trust me, we're all in the same boat. That's the problem with these kind of stamp brushes. We can alter this feature as well, but we'll do that in some other tutorial later. Let's just try our hand with the stamps first. You can always paint in some areas and then erase some stars just like I'm doing here. And we'll mostly try to keep the periphery clean off the stars. And then repeat that step for the smaller beads too. It's a struggle, as you can see. So I'm just erasing some areas with the soft airbrush as my eraser. It doesn't fully erase all the stars, it just dims them a bit too if you want. We're going to add some more darkness and depth to our beads. So above the shadow layer of the beads, create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. And repeat the step for the big bead as well. Now go back to your soft airbrush and airbrushing, and with the purple color again, we're basically just going to create some more shadow in the bead itself so that it looks a bit darker and more like the dark night sky. However, we've still got that purple periphery, which is exactly what we wanted. And then repeat this step for the smaller beads too. Looking good. Great. So the next thing that we need to be doing is to create some highlights around here. But before we go with that, I want to create some sort of more marbly kind of a texture here. So to do that, we're going to create a new clipping mask and move this layer below the stars layer. Make sure that the blend mode has been changed to add, and then repeat that step for the bigger bead layer as well. Now with this pink color selected and the soft airbrush still, really reduce the size of the brush, somewhere around 2 or 3%. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select random stars there. Choose a central point for yourself in the marble itself. It's kind of like a marble bead effect that we're trying to go for. So just create some lines and try and have them at various distances from the center, as you can see. And you don't need to be very methodical about where you're placing these lines themselves. You can have them at various distances, like you can see here. And then repeat that step with the blue color stars as well. So you're basically trying to connect a blue star to the center and a pink star to the center with the pink color. So it's like that. And just be random with those. It looks best when it's random that way. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be blending them. So I know this looks a little odd right now, but it'll look good once it's blended in. So with your soft airbrush as your smudge tool, just reduce the size of your smudge tool to around 13% or something like that. And then follow the direction of these rays and blend them in. Just very lightly, don't put a lot of pressure in the first go itself. Just blend them in so that they have a lighter sort of a trajectory. And then blend out the center. So the first blending that you're doing is from the star to the center, and then you're blending from the center to the outside. And then you're just sort of mixing it all together. And that gives it a nice kind of marble sort of a look now. So we're going to repeat this for the smaller beads as well. Again, connect all your blue beads, your blue stars to the center. And then we'll be repeating that step for the pink ones too. And remember, you can alter the size of the soft airbrush with the size of the star. So obviously the pink ones are going to be thicker and the blue ones are going to be a bit thinner. And then again, blend them in along the lines first, and then blend them from the center outwards. And then again, just along the lines once again. Now repeat that step for the other small bead too. This might be a little fast, so remember you can always just slow this video down a bit and study this technique a little bit more, try it out. It's completely alright to be doing that. Actually helps to be able to see exactly what I've worked on quite a bit. Great, so now that we've got all of our rays there, what we're next going to do is we're going to create a new clipping mask on top of both these layers, change the blend modes to add, and we're going to create some highlights now. Now make sure your soft airbrush is selected, and with this pink color, increase the size of your brush quite a bit. And then just on this outer half of this bigger bead and even the smaller beads, draw something like a crescent to give you a nice highlight for your beads. We're trying to give some more color variation to the beads themselves. So with the soft airbrush as your smudge tool, just blend some of these areas. And when you're satisfied with that, you can reduce the opacity of this layer to around 60%. That looks great. Now repeat this step for your smaller beads. We already know the opacity is going to be reduced to 60%, so I've done that already. And just around the upper crescent, create your pink highlight. And then blend them. Okay, that looks good. Now we're going to create a white highlight of an edge basically. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, repeat that step for the big bead. And then this time we're going to select the technical pen brush in inking. And with the white color, just increase your brush size a bit. And then just around the edge of the marble, you can go ahead and draw a highlight. Now it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. You can, if you want, create a complete circular highlight. I just don't think it's necessary. And then just apply a Gaussian blur of about 6% and reduce the opacity of this layer to around 50%. Now blend it out. We want just a slim periphery of this white highlight to be there. That looks great. And then repeat this step for the smaller beads too. Draw in your highlight first. And then apply a Gaussian blur of just about 5% for the smaller beads. Reduce the opacity to 50%. And then blend out your highlight. Okay, that's great. Now for the last one, we're just going to add some spot highlights. So create new clipping masks to both of these layers, change their blend modes to add, and then again with the technical pen brush, we're just going to create some shapes like these, just to signify that this is a shiny marble. And you can even alter the size, the position of these spots. And once you're satisfied with that, just reduce the opacity to around 50%. And then we're going to apply a Gaussian blur to this as well, of around 6%. That looks like a nice shiny bead, doesn't it? Okay, so repeat this last step for your smaller beads too. Create little ellipses there. They're not perfect, but who cares? We're going to be blurring them anyway. So apply a blur of about 6% again. And then reduce the opacity of this layer to about 60% for the smaller beads. Okay, so your beads are ready. Yay! That looks great. We're going to be working on the rings now. So before we do that, remember again, we do need to group all of these layers together. I'm just altering this spot highlight size a little bit. So group all of your bead layers together and rename the first one as big bead, and then group all of the small beads layers together and rename that group as small beads. Awesome. We're going to work on these rings now. So starting off with the bigger light ring, create a clipping mask to that and change the blend mode to add. And then do the same for the smaller light ring too. Create a clipping mask there and change the blend mode to add. Starting off with the bigger one first, select the soft airbrush again. Remember which layer you're on. And we're going to choose this orange color. Now reduce the size of your brush to around 4%. And then just draw this edge highlight on both sides of this light ring. And then remember to do the same step on the lower side of this light ring layer too. And when we're done with that, we're just going to apply a Gaussian blur to this. Not much, just about 4%. 3%. And then reduce the opacity of this layer to around 40%. I know it looks really light, but we're going to be creating another layer on top of this. But before we do that, let's go to the smaller light ring and go to that clipping mask layer and then repeat the step of adding edge highlights with the same sized brush, which was 4% size. Create these edge highlights. And then repeat this step for the lower side of this smaller light ring too. Alright, now apply a Gaussian blur again of about 3%. And then reduce the opacity again to around 40%. Great. So Next step would be to add another layer of highlights to these. So we're going to create a new clipping mask below this first highlight layer, and then change the blend mode to add again. Now repeat that step for both of these light ring layers, and this time increase the size of the soft airbrush to around 10%. And then we're just going to create the edge highlight only on one side, as you can see now. And then repeat that step for the lower layer too. Sorry, the lower side of this lighter ring. Okay, now apply a Gaussian blur of around 4 to 6%. 4% looks good, I think. And we don't really need to be applying much of opacity change here at all, so I think we can actually blur it up a bit more. So let's add another 6%. 6% Gaussian blur, yeah. That looks good. And let's repeat this step for the smaller light ring. And just one area, as you can see, one side of the smaller light ring, we create this bigger edge highlight. And then apply a Gaussian blur of about, let's say, 4%. I think it looks okay with just 4% here. Looks good. So now we're going to work on these darker rings. So let's go back to our bigger dark ring here, and then create a clipping mask there, and change the blend mode to add. We're going to create highlights for that, and also repeat that same step for your smaller dark ring. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add. Return to your bigger dark ring layer, the clipping mask there. And then we've got a brush size of about 10% here. It's really up to you. If you're comfortable with that brush size, you can continue using that, or you can change it to whatever's more comfortable to achieve this kind of an edge highlight here. And then blur it up again. So we'll apply about a 10% Gaussian blur here. Now this is what we've we've created the larger highlight here first. We'll be creating another highlight layer in a bit for the lower end. So let's create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add. And then reduce the size of your brush again. If you've used the 10% size initially, you can reduce it to 6%, or proportionately decrease it to whatever size you'd increased it to before. And then draw another set of highlights which are smaller in size, in thickness basically. And then apply a Gaussian blur of 4%. And you can blend these edges in. As you can see, it's got a nice gradient for the highlights too. So reduce this layer's opacity to around 40%. Now go to your smaller dark ring layer, and just on the lower edge of this dark ring, we're going to create a highlight there. We do not need to create another one there. And then repeat that step for this lower end, the lower side of this ring here too. And again, just use whatever brush size you're comfortable with. And then apply a Gaussian blur of about 4%. Okay, so now we're just going to create some shadows. So create a new clipping mask under the highlights layer and change the blend modes to multiply. We're still working on our dark ring layers. Now our shadows are going to be on the opposite side of the highlights. So create a shadows there. You can change your brush size. I've used about a 6%. And just paint in these shadows here, just around the edges. And I've just added a bit of shadow for the bigger bead here too, because it's going to be lying over the ring there. And once again, we're going to blur it up, just around 5 or 6%. 6% looks good. And then reduce the opacity of this layer slightly to around 70%. Beautiful. And then let's repeat this step for the smaller dark ring too. So we're going to go back to our multiply layer of the smaller dark ring, and then again on the opposite side of the highlights, just paint in the shadows. And repeat that step for the lower edge of the ring too. And apply Gaussian blur of around 4% now. Great. And reduce the opacity to 70%. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, I think. But there are just some areas here that we can add some more shadows to. They're basically coming off the marbles themselves. So I'm just adding in those shadows on the smaller dark ring with the same orange color, and then blending them in slightly. Okay, so group these layers together and rename the lowermost group to the small dark ring. And then the group above that, we'll name that as small light ring. And the group above that will be the big light ring. I told you these names will be funny. But they're easier to navigate than if you can just come up with a simple name, isn't it? And the last one will be the big dark ring. Wow. All right, it's time to work on these crosses now. So create a new clipping mask to both the cross layers. Well, we start off with the first one, with the top one first, and then change the blend mode to we're going to start off with shadows first. So change it to multiply. And then with the same soft airbrush, reduce your brush size to about 4%. And with the orange color selected, just draw in the shadows on the lower sides of these crosses. And as you can see, I've reduced the opacity of the crosses which are below these top crosses layer, just so that I can see exactly which layer I'm working on. And remember to go back to the lower galaxy band crosses too. Yeah, this one does not want to listen. Alright. Always remember where your light source is and place your shadows accordingly. And once you're happy with that, we're going to blur these up too. So not much, we just need about 2 or 3% of a blurring there. 2% looks good. And then reduce the opacity to around 60%. And we're good to go with the shadows for this layer. Great. Now create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add. You know what it's time for, highlights. So with the same orange color selected, I'm going to slightly maybe just keep the same size brush, 4%. And draw your highlights on the opposite side of the shadows. And then once again, blur it up to around 3%. Great. We're going to add one more layer of highlights now. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and then reduce the size of your brush to around 2%. And then just create another thinner layer of highlights just on top of these pre-existing highlights there. And then blur it up again, around 3% or 4%. Okay, I think that looks great. Now it's time to work on the lower crosses layers. So group all of the top cross layers together and rename that group as top crosses. Great. Work on the lower crosses now. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to repeat the same thing again. So first things first, let's bring back the opacity of this layer to 100% so we can see exactly what we're working with. And then increase the brush size to around 4% again. And let's go ahead and paint in our shadows. Now remember, because these crosses are going to be the lower ones, they're going to bear the shadows of the metal bands which are crossing over them. So remember to make their shadows there too. As you can see, I'm doing just now. The last one, I'm just going to edit that because our shadows are actually going to be on the opposite side because the light source is coming from, let's say, the top, somewhere from the top area. So our shadows are going to actually be on the other side. And then remember to add in your shadows on the lower crosses, on the lower galaxy band as well. And then blur them up to just around 3%. Okay. Now let's go ahead and reduce the opacity of this layer to around 60%. I've just noticed that this area needs to be in shadows too, one of the top cross areas. So I've returned to that shadow area that shadow layer and drawn in some shadows there. Returning to our lower crosses layer, we've created a new clipping mask now and changed the blend mode to add. And now we're painting in the highlights, the first layer of the highlights. And then apply Gaussian blur about 3%. I just feel like we can add some more shadows here. We really haven't. So I've returned to our shadow layer of the lower crosses layer and then painted in these shadows of the overlapping cross bands. And then we've created a new clipping mask on top and then change the blend mode to add. We're going to create our second layer of highlights. Reduce the brush size to about 2% and then paint in your second layer of highlights with the same orange color. And once again, apply a Gaussian blur of 3%. That looks great. Now we need to add in some shadows there, but I've just noticed that I haven't added any highlights or shadows here. Actually highlights in this section, so I'm just making that addition. And I think this is part of the lower crosses layer. So remember, if you're not using the Gaussian blur, you can always just manually blend all of these highlights or whatever you're trying to blend there. Blending yourself manually gives you a lot more control, so you can use that for exclusive areas like these. So rename this group as lower crosses. All right. So we're nearly done with all of this. We just need to go ahead and make some more additions here. So create a new clipping mask on top in your big light ring group and change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to add some shadows of the beads, of the big bead basically. There's a bit more of a shadow there at the edges too. So firstly, we'll create a shadow of the big bead, and then on both the ends of the ring here, as you can see, we're going to create some more shadows there. And then blend them out again with the soft airbrush. Remember, the beauty lies in the details, so we can't forget all of these extra little details that we need to remember to paint in. Okay, and then remember to repeat this step for the smaller light ring as well. So create a new clipping mask on top and then change the blend mode of this layer to multiply, and then first paint in the shadow of the bead and then shadows of the edges, and then blend them in. Alright, it's time for the highlights. So again, now create a new clipping mask on top of this layer. Change the blend mode to add, and then using the same orange color, just create some highlights. Now this is what gives this ring a nice glossy metallic kind of an effect, as you can see. So our highlights and shadows are so important in creating this kind of an effect. So remember to add these in and just blend them in slightly. Add in some more highlight on the lower edge here and blend that in. Remember to repeat this step for your bigger light ring now. So go back to the big light ring group and create a new clipping mask. Change the blend mode to add again. And with the soft airbrush once more, just create some more highlights which are corresponding in the direction of the highlight from the small light ring and blend it out. Great! So now we're just going to create some more effects here. So we need some reflection of these purple marble beads here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our small dark ring group, create a new clipping mask there, and then we're going to change the blend mode of that to add. And this time we're going to select this with the same soft airbrush, select this purple color. And then what we're going to do is we're going to paint in this slight purpley sort of a reflected light onto a dark ring there. And then just blend it in. You can totally skip this step if you want, but I think it just gives it a nice sort of an extra effect there too. So I've just done that. It's barely visible really, but it does give it a little bit of an extra reflection effect there. And if you want, you can even add in this little reflected purple light onto the small light ring there too. Haven't done that, but you can do that if you want. Now we're going to add some glows. So create a new layer, and then we're going to move this layer right above the background. So change the blend mode of this layer to add, and we're going to duplicate this layer just because it's going to be easier to create a new layer that way. But with the top duplicated layer and the soft airbrush, and with this orange color, you can increase the size of your brush. Just on the lower edges of the ring, paint in this little glow here that you can see. And then we're going to reduce the opacity of this layer to around 30%. Okay, so it's a slight glow that you can see, and I think that effect looks good. Now for the lower of the duplicated layers, change the blend mode of that layer to color dodge this time. And then select the purple color there. And with the same large brush size, paint in this nice bluish purple effect that color dodge gives us, just over the same area as the orange glow. Then you can apply a Gaussian blur of just around 3% to this layer, and I think we can even go ahead and blend in the orange layer slightly there. So with the soft airbrush selected as your blend brush, just slightly blend this glow out, so that there isn't a stark outline there. This looks better. Alright, we're going to repeat these steps for the big bead glow there as well. So create a new layer under the big bead group, and then with the orange color, and slightly reduce the size of your brush, just create a semicircular arc there. You don't need it to be very thick as such. That looks great. And then apply a Gaussian blur of around 10%. Great. We haven't changed the blend mode of this layer, alright? So create a new layer on top of this one and change this layer's blend mode to add. And with the purple color selected, increase the brush size slightly to around 11 to 12% and draw in this purplish glow there. And this layer can be blurred to somewhere around 18 to 20%. We're going to blend both of these layers slightly. So first of all, just reduce the opacity of the orange layer to around 60% so that it's not so striking against the background unnecessarily. And then we're just going to blend in these edges. And I think that looks spectacular. it's time to add some flares now to your ring to make it look like it's sparkling. So create a new layer right under the sketch layer, change the blend mode to add, and then in luminance select the flare brush. And then with the white color selected, increase the brush size to about 10% and then add in this flare there. You can rotate this flare to whatever position you want it to be in. I think this looks good as a vertical flare. And then you can reduce the size of the flare to 6%. Select this smaller brush as the smaller stamp and then rotate that. Okay, so this looks good. I do want it to have a bit more of a rose gold kind of an effect. So we've duplicated this flare layer, turned on alpha lock for the top of the duplicated ones, and using the soft airbrush and the orange color, I've just painted in this orange sort of glow for the flare. And then reduced the opacity of this lower flare layer to about 80%. That looks beautiful. Right, so for our last step, we're going to go ahead and select the bokeh lights brush in luminance. And you can use whatever brush size you want for this, about 26% to 30% or even lesser. We're going to create a new layer, which is right above the background. And then change the blend mode of this layer to add. And then with the same orange color selected, go ahead and paint in these beautiful bokeh lights. I love this brush so much. It really gives you such a beautiful magical effect without much effort at all. So it might take a few tries to get exactly the size or the placement of the lights as you want. You can even slightly erase them as you want as well with the soft airbrush as your eraser. And yeah, just have fun with that. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial. It's been amazing trying to draw this beautiful galaxy ring here. I hope you had fun. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you liked the tutorial, and don't forget to get your sketches and palettes from the Artistic Archive. I'll see you in the next one.